because Fink is so good about having these visual images to open every chapter, or something very similar to open every chapter, I think it's something that we the whole class can start with, and then move on to the more specific things. So let me see if we have a decent distribution of different assignments. But while I'm doing that, while I'm pulling up the list of people with the list of attendees, why don't we start off, just anybody and everybody start off with this first question of child laborers, the pictures of child laborers. What did you notice about them that helps you understand the nature of child labor and the calls for reform in this period?
It looked dangerous.
Dangerous.
Dangerous. I mean, I don't know what exactly, like that warping machine, that definitely looks like something a child shouldn't be playing with. Like that little girl probably looks like she's 10, I would say, if that's fair.
I don't know.
In
Yeah.
that first one, I'm looking at the first one.
Yeah. I'm looking at it too. That's why my head's down.
Yeah. And they don't look clothed properly. It definitely looks like her dress could get stuck in that machine.
Okay, and that, by the way, did happen a lot. And by the way, it's I forgot what warp and weft are, but when you're weaving, not weave, well, weaving, I guess, but also making textiles, there's a warp and weft, and there's a difference between them. Somebody can Google them. It matters. Like the warp side is the smooth side, and the weft side is the rough side. I can't remember of the finished piece of cloth. But notice how she's got her left hand stuck in what looks like could be, a gear, eventually a gear or a roller. She could have her hand crushed. You're right. And also, not only does she have what you might consider inappropriate work clothing, what about the woman next to her?
She does too.
Yeah.
But like the males in these photos look like they have appropriate work attire on.
This is an extremely useful observation, Lindsay. That was Lindsay, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it does. It does look like that. Well, let's stick with the first one though. There are a number of things about this photograph, however, that make it look staged to me. Did anyone of you? Now, again, this is with a lot of these things, you can't be certain about what actually happened because we don't know. But why are there only three people involved? Three people in this whole big thing, right? I mean, in theory, if a big factory runs with all these machines being attended to.
Well, that's what I was going to say. That's the first thing that jumped out to me is like these factories should be full of people. Like there's no way that there would be three people, and for them to just be standing still, even at this time. So the warp, I looked it up. The warp is the length that goes up and down, and the
weft
the weft is the warp direction, refers to the threads that run the length of the fabric. So I guess it's about like the way it spins on the machine.
Yeah.
But my understanding was that they hired children primarily because they could fit their smaller hands inside the machines to grab things, right?
Bobbins, yeah, especially, yeah.
So, I mean, the fact that there's no other children in this picture, it's a little, I'd say probably a 12-year-old and then an adult. My guess is that the factory isn't actually operating at this point because it all looks very still.
Yeah, well, of course it's not a video, it's still photo, but I think you're right. I think what they did was, and again, you can't make solid conclusions on this. I think that somebody wanted to take a picture showing how, first of all, how clean and orderly these places are, right? It's not as if there's cotton dust flying everywhere.
They look pretty clean too. Like
well, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Or something.
So my again, this is a guess, but this did happen. So I don't know if this specific photograph is like this. This is the staged by the one of the textile mill owners or managers as a response to critiques of the conditions in the mills.
And by still, I meant like none of the machines, you can very clearly see what they're doing. Like if they were running, the action would be blurry because of the response time of the camera.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're right about that. Yeah, I didn't think so.
That's what I meant by still. Like the room is still. There are not people blurry in the background moving around. It is a very still shot. It is as if everyone was told and freeze.
Yeah, yeah. So it's clearly, yeah, you're right. That wheel at the to the by the girl's right hand would be blurry because it would be spinning. The spokes in that wheel and everything. Yeah.
I do
Right.
have,
That's my impression. Sorry, Lindsay.
no, you're good. No, you're good. I do have a question. So like I know women had to wear dresses and like dress up during this time, but when they did work, were they allowed to wear pants? Like I know women like weren't really allowed to wear pants until like the 50s or 60s. But did all women wear dresses to work? Even
No.
shops?
Well, it depends on where you were. It depends on how you were being presented to the public, if you're being presented to the public at all. There were kind of versions of union suits or overalls for women in certain types of industries, but for the most part, the reason you see the men in overalls in the glass blowing thing, or you see men in overalls in the in things like the mines, is because that's that's the type of work they were doing. Sorry, I just realized I didn't have my phone on mute. Do not disturb. Um, so yeah, for the most part, you have women dressing up to a certain dressing fully to a certain degree for factory work, right? And again, exactly as you said or Katie said, uh, this was a sometimes a cause of people getting their clothing caught. Now, one of the reasons they dress like this, or were asked to dress like this, or required to dress like this, whatever the practice was because they wanted to show that, you know they wanted to make it. Employers wanted to see that this is an acceptable woman's profession. Okay, we're not turning women into automaton, machine men like Blade Runner or anything like that. It's a it's a they're still women. Um, but also, yeah, these are the clothes that were available to them. Now, as World War One starts, and then certainly as World War Two starts, and you have far more women factory workers than before, then you get sort of, what a union suit is, or a work overalls, or not overalls like denim overalls like the ones in the glass blowing thing, but it's kind of a huge onesie, or you know,
Oh yeah, like what they wore in like the Titanic and like the boiler room.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's coveralls. Yeah, Katie has written coveralls in the chat. Yeah, that's what women laborers were, and that continued for factory work for the rest of time. I assume that women factory workers now wear essentially coveralls or a uniform or something. What else about this? One of the reasons I'm interested in this picture, because I was just up taking care of my parents. My parents live in Albany, and they live in actually a little town called Cohoes outside of Albany. And at one time, the Cohoes textile mill was the largest one in the world. And when we were looking, sorry to go on at length about this, but when we were looking for a place for them to retire to, sort of, not a care home, but some place for them to leave the big house and downsize. A lot of these mills, because they're so huge and into such high ceilings, have been converted into really quite nice apartment buildings in large parts of the Northeast. Lowell, Massachusetts has a lot of them. Boston has a lot of them. Other places have a lot of them. So I got to see, in taking the tours of these things, I got to see the apartments. I got to see the transformation, because they showed you pictures of what it looked like in the mill days and what it looks like now. And it is they're unbelievably massive, even by modern standards, right? We, as a 21st century, 20th century, 21st century person, I think an airplane hangar is massive, and it is, but these places were basically almost as big. So that's another thing that struck me. And if we were to take the hose mill as an example, this would have been only one room of 50 such rooms in the main mill there. So it's just an enormous operation. Anything more about this picture? Does anyone think it's not staged?
I think all these photos are staged.
Well, okay.
Like to some degree. Like, hey, we're taking a photo, maybe like a promo, like not like a promo, but like to like get people to work.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well,
or in like a newspaper, or like make like a statement, I guess. Like,
well, to some extent, all photos are staged, even if they're. I mean, if a photographer is there, the photographer is planning to take a picture. But yes, I think you're right about all of them. I notice. Anyone else want to chime in on this? What about the boy picking berries in 1909?
Honestly, that one, I'm gonna say, like, quote unquote here, seems the safest out of them all.
Yeah.
But like, he's not even wearing shoes.
Yeah.
And he's out picking berries, which probably isn't the best thing. But I mean, in terms of other things, especially compared to like the first and the last photo, it definitely seems like it would be the least dangerous. But that's saying a little, because all of them aren't really the best.
Yeah, the problem with fruit picking and this kind of agricultural work is it's very hard on your hands over a number of years, and if you stick with it for your entire working life, you end up with terrible arthritis. But I have some more thoughts about what you're saying there, Ben, but I want to hear from other people too.
he doesn't look happy. He looks miserable. Like he looks like he's very tired. And he probably
Okay.
looks he's about 6. Maybe.
Okay.
He looks a little younger than that other girl from like the
Okay.
last photo.
It's really great that you're able to pinpoint their ages, or relatively pinpoint their ages. That's an important fact. I mean, these are awfully young people doing heavy duty manual work. What else? Someone else chime in.
Do we know for a fact, is that the deal? Because I read through this. Does it say anywhere that this is that he is picking berries, like as a, like, that he's working to pick berries? Or is this just showing?
Well,
the only reason I ask, because the rest of that picture doesn't look agriculturalized at all. Like, it just looks like he has found berries.
a berry tree, a berry bush.
Yeah, a berry bush.
Well, I think what let me just see. I want to make double sure that,
Because when I read through, like in the introduction, it doesn't specifically show that like these are going to be like work situations.
yeah. It's almost as if they're deliberate, again, staged pictures of what work situations would look like. I think you're right there, except that like a lot of early photographs, that the central part is clear, but the surrounding area is blurred.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see that there are other berry bushes on the periphery there. And what the photographers used to do in the studio is they would, and if it, well, you wouldn't be, they don't do this anymore,
Yeah.
but they projected down the image onto the paper, but they would have a piece of cardboard with a circle in it, and they'd sort of hover that circle over the central part of the image, so that a lot of the so that would be they would keep the light would be constantly, the central part of the image would have constant light constant exposure, and the periphery gets this sort of blurred
Yeah,
aspect.
to make
This
a
is not
vignette.
right. This is not because of a highly focused lens that makes all this. That's not the way those cameras were in those days.
Right.
So that's another sort of reason why it's staged. But I'm also I'm interested. Well, sorry. Before I say my 2 cents, someone else chip in.
He looks like he has like actual worker clothes on. Like definitely like not
Yeah.
like normal out clothes.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe he was like working, or maybe
Yeah.
like what Katie said. Like, did he actually find that tree? But there's no one around him either. Just like in the other photo, it looks like it's just him. Like you can't see anything in the back.
Yeah. Well, again, there's a good question of whether it's staged, but at a certain point, as you say, all photographs are staged, but also, it may, even though it's staged, it might not be that far off from the way these conditions were. Like you had to hunker down to pick berries. You didn't bend from the waist or whatever. One of you said he looked unhappy. The big impression I get from this photograph, and again, you have to take all of these as impressions, not necessarily as solid fact, is that it's intended to show that this is very healthy, outdoorsy work. He's not in a factory. He's definitely, he's out on the on the American farm doing American farm work. He's that's good for kids. It's a lot of fresh air and all that sort of stuff. That's the impression I got. And in fact, the barefootedness sort of enhances that in the sense that um this is so he doesn't have to wear shoes because he's not in a factory where there are nails and everything. He's out there doing good manual labor on the American agricultural plain. Anyone else get that impression? That it might have been purposely taken to show to claim that this is good honest work. This is the type of chores that all kids did. Nothing strange about this, nothing unhealthy about this. In fact, the argument would be that it's very healthy to be doing this. Yeah, Jeanette, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, that's kind of when I looked at it, it was kind of reminiscent of like my childhood, because I know when I was younger, I would go out and we'd like pick wild berries and stuff.
Yeah.
But also on another level, I grew up around a lot of rural poverty, and it kind of is a little saddening because I think a lot of kids from rural areas are pushed into like manufacturing jobs and agriculture jobs because it's easier than getting educated. And I mean, I know this is the 1900s and not the 2000s, but it's still kind of reminiscent.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. And you could say that this I mean, you may not have this type of berry picking anymore. Maybe it's mechanized in more ways now than it used to be, but this type of labor, this child is doing the type of child's labor that a child laborer would have done in ancient times. So this is much closer to, I don't know, ancient grain harvesting in ancient Egypt or Lebanon than it is to modern, to what's happening nowadays. Now, of course, obviously this is a berry orchard and it's planned out and they're planted in rows. It isn't wild in that sense, but it is kind of interesting how it might be considered, in a way, timeless before the arrival of mechanical farming for this type of thing. I don't know that that's true. I don't know. Maybe berries and grapes and stuff were Oh, still have to be picked by hand for all I know, or it's more cheaper to do that.
I don't know where I lived. It's like you never had like big enough sprawling fields or like
Right.
the machine, because farm machinery is so expensive. Like you never had the money to be able to really get anything to manufacture like that. But I think it's different in like the Midwest and the South.
Well, and of course, it could very well be that one of the reasons we have migrant workers, especially doing things like grape picking and through fruit picking, is because it can't be very efficiently mechanized. That you end up destroying more food than you harvest. All right, what about the glass blower and the mold boy, 1908 below?
This picture is terrifying to me.
Uh-huh.
Just strictly from like a parent's perspective, because I know like we went to the glass blowing center in Pittsburgh,
Yeah.
which is fantastic. But seeing this child that close to that molten hot glass is so stressful. And it's just so stressful to me to look at this.
Yeah, it's really terrifying. I don't have kids, but I have like a lot of nieces and nephews, and I couldn't imagine my 3-year-old niece or like 10-year-old nephew like doing that. It and like all like these guys, like these older men are just watching him. He has to be like 10. They're just
Yeah,
like,
I'd say he's like 10 or 11. And it's definitely like an impressive skill to have. But watching this, like, oh, watching it. I'm not watching it. It's a picture. But in my head, it's like I can see it moving and it just stresses me out. And I'm sorry.
No, sure. What else?
He's called Mold Boy, which is very concerning. Like I'm wondering what like I don't know, is there like black mold around him?
I think it's the mold.
The mold
for
of the
design.
shaping
Yeah,
of
it
it.
mold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I see. Yes. I was also thinking of like, I'm sure it's like wet and dirty in there.
Yeah.
And they
yeah, it
would be
definitely doesn't
really,
look clean. That
It's
floor looks
probably not
dirty.
wet though. You'd be surprised because glass does not function well in wet and dirty places. Like glass has to be, it's going to be hot and dry and probably cleaner than you expect, because then the glass doesn't turn out right. Like glass is very temperamental. So
And
if
that
they're making it for production purposes, it's probably, other than the heat and the danger of the heat aspect, it's probably cleaner than a lot of other places.
that floor definitely looks really dirty though. I'm pretty sure there's glass on that floor.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, other
Doesn't
than that part of the danger, like, but as far as like factory working, there's not like the spinning, like heavy machinery or the same kind of dirt that you're going to get in those kind of places. Because glass, like you can't have dust in the air, that kind of stuff, because it'll mess with the glass.
But the kid is down. I can't remember who said it. The kid is down near the dangerous parts. I mean, maybe it's dangerous to blow into those tubes and stuff. Maybe it's bad for your lungs or whatever. But he's down near the hot pipes. He's if he's down near the mold, he's down. If he's a mold boy, he's right where the heat and all the action is, I presume. I wonder if this is sort of like the bobbin girls in the textile factories. You know, they had to have small hands in order to manipulate this kind of stuff. Well, this is one of the downfalls of this book a little bit, and this chapter is more like that than other chapters, in the sense that I wish Fink had given us more indication of where the background for the actual photographs come from. This one looks the least staged, to my mind, but what do you think?
I would agree that it is the least staged out of the three. It looks like everyone in the photo is busy doing the work, except for the two in the back that are just kind of watching the kid do the stuff, which is kind of weird to me, but whatever. I guess that was the time. And it also strikes me interesting that out of the 3 photos, this one has the most work appropriate attire, in my opinion.
Yeah. Absolutely. But, again, this is one of these things where they're not, it's not as if, they're wearing, have masks on or even gloves, really. So it doesn't, it is very much giving us, I think, the indication that the workers are sort of disposable, in the sense that, yes, these people could be wearing protective stuff, but it's cheaper just to replace them with new people if they get injured, rather than have a sort of whole safety protocol thingy. I put the reason why I was pausing there for a moment while you're talking is because there's a very famous book, and there's a very famous book in British history, actually, called The Human Documents of the Industrial Revolution, and it's from the 1840s and 50s. And what it it has his pictures from the 1840s, 50s. What happened was that Parliament had a commission on child labor, had an investigation into child labor, and they sent out people to document it. And I put a couple of pictures of really absolutely brutal child labor, where kids are pulling coal carts underground, almost as if they're, well, not almost, as completely as if they're draft animals, and they're doing it. And by the way, they're doing it in the dark, except they have a headlamp, some of them. Can you see those pictures? I put them in there. One's called The Hurrier.
Yeah.
If you click on them, do they open up?
Yes. They look scary. That's terrifying.
Oh yeah. Believe, and this is not our period that we're talking about, but this what the reason I put them there is I showed you that child labor is not only an old thing, an ancient thing, obviously, but the industrialization of child labor goes back to the very beginnings of the Industrial Revolution.
My grandfather, he was in World War II, and he started working, my dad said, when he was like 11 or 12, maybe. I don't even think they finished school.
Right.
But he said, I don't know, I don't forget like what he did, but like I know like even like when he was growing up, they didn't really have child labor laws, because I mean he was working at 12, 13 years old just to get milk, just to like afford to like help their family. I forget what he did, but like my dad told me like his parents worked like at 13, 14, didn't go to school. I don't know like the conditions they worked in or like what exactly they did, but like, I mean, it was even happening back then.
Yeah,
Like,
or as recently as then, what you mean? Yeah.
yeah.
Well, there were child labor laws. It's just that there were all these workarounds. So even when I was young, I guess I wasn't working in the 60s, but in the 70s when I started working, I was 13 or something when I got my first job. You had to get a work permit, or maybe you didn't. But it was, definitely a summer thing. But it's still, you're out there working, and I think especially in the middle of the country, child labor laws were very, very loosely enforced for a very long time, well until past your grandfather's generation. Let's just say I'm sure that's the case. I wouldn't bet money on it, but I'm sure that's the case.
But they had to work to make a living, to like,
Yeah.
Because like they had so many kids back then too. And I'm assuming that's why these people worked, because their parents weren't making enough money. So the kids had to go work.
Yes. Yeah.
No.
Well, yes, but don't fall in. There's this sort of historical myth, longstanding historical myth, that people had to have lots of children in order so they could work on the farm and they could help out and they could raise more money. It turns out that children are actually more expensive than they're worth in terms of if you think of a child as an economic engine to help support the family, they really can't do that to any great degree until they start to be 7, 8 years old. And the cost of raising them, believe me, there are historians and archaeologists, people like this, who work on this kind of thing, and they actually they actually calculate how many calories it requires to raise a child to a sufficient age where they can start working. And it turns out that children aren't, I don't know how to say this without sounding like a total believer in children don't pay their way. In other words, it's more expensive, and families learn this early on. Families have children because they want to have children, and because it's a societal thing, and in many cases, it's a sort of sign of pride and prosperity that you have 12 children rather than 2. But they're more expensive than the money they earn for the family to raise them over a long period of time. But that doesn't mean and so what happens is, in the Industrial Revolution, children are particularly chosen for work because they can get in these small spaces. Why dig a coal shaft that to transport the coal out of the coal mine that has to be large enough to accommodate a full-grown man, when you can dig a small one much, much cheaper, because all you need is kids to push the coal carts through or drag the coal carts up to the drag the coal up to the surface. See what I mean? So in many ways, child labor gets worse. Not in many ways, in almost every way, child labor gets worse in the Industrial Revolution.
So I texted my dad because I wanted
Because
to
of that.
know where my grandfather worked. He worked at Laser's Farm in Bushy Run for just a gallon of milk all day. Like back in, I would say before World War II, because my grandfather was in World War II. So he had to be like 10, 11 when he had to do that. I just thought it was interesting. Sorry, it was like a random fact. I just like thought it was
No.
interesting to share. So
No. It's good. It's good that you get these this information. What was I going to say? I was going to say something else about that. Anyway, but I'm so glad that all of you seem to have taken a critical eye to these photographs, and that you're not just accepting them at face value. You say, okay, wait a minute, this looks staged. This factory looks too clean. There aren't enough people working it. This kid, well, as I was saying, this kid picking berries, it looks extremely healthy and hardy and good old American farming sort of thing. And that the glass blowing picture is probably the least staged. So anyway, let's move on. Who had let's see, who's
I think
here
it's
that had
just me.
question 2?
I'm sorry if there's noise. They're building a garage right beside my house. Like we're getting a garage put in. So if there is noise when I do talk, I just wanted to let you guys know
Okay. They should realize that this class is more important than that.
that. Tell my boyfriend that.
I'm gonna send down a Luca Brazzi down there to straighten them out. So is it only you, Katie, that has this question here?
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
I think there's a bunch of other people from the next group, but I think it's just me.
Okay.
Okay. Let me pull my question back up. Okay, so these 2 documents are just a wild ride from start to finish to begin with. Listening chairs are an interesting concept. I think it's hard. This is one of those times that, like, with history, you have to be willing to address the things that are what is the phrase, the familiar and the strange.
Yeah.
And you still have to address both and not recoil from it.
Yeah, that's right.
unfortunately, this is something that is very familiar to us, right? Like education has really kind of maintained this blanketed idea of everyone gets everything, even if it means the people who need more maybe don't get it.
Yeah.
Well into today. And now modern times have kind of changed that a little bit in people getting assistance, but this idea that what is it? Shoot, sorry, I should have highlighted in the book, but rental books make it hard.
Oh, that's right. I don't even think of that. Yeah.
The quote is, "I'm afraid we have not what you want. You want something that'll make at which the children may work, and these are all for listening." So that the idea that we don't want children to listen, we want them all to be working, to be doing, to be functioning better, is such an interesting thing. And then he juxtaposes that with the idea of imagination, that kids see things everywhere. Like kids, no matter where they are, they're seeing different things, they're creating different things. And why are we so hard of heart and slow to believe is the other line that really struck out to me. And that it's interesting because you see that this really could have been written today.
Well, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
This is not an argument that or this is not an essay that was incredibly single in its time. But I don't think that it was, I think in looking at it, it really, education in the way that it was functioning was kind of a baby. Like they hadn't had real school, quote unquote, for that many years, right? We're looking at 1900.
Yeah.
And at least, I mean, it had been what, maybe 30 years since it came as a federal declaration that kids had, that they could go to school, like the public schoolhouses. That's a baby institution.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you get this it's just interesting that things have not really changed that much. Sorry, I'm trying to go fast because you have a lot to get through. The other one, the corruption of municipal politics, also could have been written this week. I did highlight in my book this one because it's kind of you can't get past it. There's a line in the second page on 379, because politics is business. There you go. Right therein lies the essence of this entire piece.
Right.
That he goes on to talk about, but what do good people want? He banters back and forth about the boss being a good politician is not a good citizen, especially if you're a big businessman, then you're busy and you stay busy and you have all of these things, but at the core of it, politics is business. And so sorry, I'm trying to answer the question.
Well, I just wonder whether Lincoln Steffens is basically saying that, well, in many ways saying that, look, he's not directly addressing Dewey's argument, of course, but
right,
saying, what, sure, we can have these ideals about education, but they're just going to come out and get ramrodded into one of these aspects of life that's all good and all this no good and all the same anyway.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I had written down was that imagination ? Because we lose that as adults, right? Even Dewey kind of hints at that. Is like, we take that away from kids? Do we lose that? Because as adults, how many adults do get to use their imagination every day? Like that's their career. I mean, that it's different now.
If they do it, they do it in their field, right? Yeah. So the people who work at Google are constantly being imaginative about stuff that Google needs. The
Right.
people who work at, I have a friend who owns Allegheny Mountain hardwood flooring, these just this glorious lumber place, and you know, they're using their imagination to come up with different ways to make the wood more beautiful. And but you're right, as Stephens is saying, yeah, but they're being narrowed into one thing.
Which is it's interesting because you can see this existing in this time period, and you would think that 100 and what are we 120 some odd
Yeah.
years later that we would have figured this out. But it goes back to that business as politics thing. And have we allowed kids the space to figure those places out and make the world better, or did we just keep status quo? And because in a lot of things we've done better, worse, we've, ebbed and flowed. But, that first thing, that could be my kid's school today. He's in the second grade, and their school is set up for the masses and not necessarily for the individual. So,
These are problems that we've never been able to overcome, and maybe they can't be overcome. I don't know. This is but what one of the reasons I think it's so good to focus in on a period like this as we do in this course is you get to see that there are people, as I say in my other course, people are paying attention.
yeah.
And they're making arguments about things and saying that things should change or a certain way, because it's not as if they're just letting everything happen to them. Now, what they say or the suggestions they make might not be taken up or changed. I mean, a lot of progressive era reforms do go through, and a lot of them don't. So, but I think one of the things we forget about is how active people are in the past in talking about their own lives.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. So you're right. I think Ben's here, and this is question 3. Ben's here. Joe Ward's here. Joe Francis here. Oh, the 3 Joes are all here. Okay, wow. That means that practically no one's available for questions 4 and 5. Okay. Go ahead, guys. But people.
All right. Well, I guess to start, like in document 4, it just gave it was a firsthand account of what happened during the fire. And I mean, it definitely helps to see why like reform was pushed, especially. And for those of you that didn't read into it too much, essentially, it was the shirtwaist factory caught on fire, and it pretty much the people inside the building were trapped. Like it was I think at like the 7th floor or above, but anybody above the fire couldn't get down because there weren't safety regulations. And essentially, instead of dying by the fire, they were actually jumping out the window, because that was better than what would have happened if they would have stayed. And I think they said the total count was about 50 something from people who jumped, and there were just as many though inside that couldn't make it out. And he was saying at one point there was a man in the building who was pretty much throwing people out the window so they didn't have to die by the fire.
Yeah.
It was very sad to read that, but it also helped for the next people's arguments to kind of have more relevance and impact, because now people were like, okay, this is ridiculous, this isn't going to stand. Especially with Rabbi Stephen, he was saying he was I think more of a, like, we just saw what happened, like this can't go unnoticed. And I believe he was saying how, I think it was him, or it might have been the Baptist Walter, was saying how they wouldn't have they're going to claim they have no money, but we all know that's a lie. Essentially in relation to how poor the workers were treated and the lack of safety regulations. They know that they have the money because they're not putting it to where it needs to be put. And
they themselves are making a ton. Yeah.
Yes. And I think in relation to the question, I think overall, both of them, especially Baptist Walter, was his approach was more of like a realist approach to the situation. And he garnered appeal by relating it to like the Christian faith. And then he got into the real talk of how if a businessman does do what I'm saying and pays $12 a week, he's just going to get undercut by people paying $7 or $5 or whatever, or like, because like he won't be able to sustain it for too long, because he'll go bankrupt. So the people who are essentially cheaping out on wages will last longer, and he might go good for a month or so, but assuming he hires as many even people that he doesn't need and pays this wage, it just in that world it just wouldn't happen, and he understands that. But I just think in general between the two, they both were very real. And I mean, Rabbi Stephen was saying how it was like this disaster, it wasn't inevitable. Like they could have done more to it and they didn't. And now they need to do more to it so this doesn't happen again.
The lesson of the hour is that while property is good, life is better. That while possessions are valuable, life is priceless. This is a Rabbi Wise. So yeah, go ahead, Joe. Joe Ward put something in the chat. So go, Joe. Why don't you take up the ball and run with it?
Yeah, it was Rabbi Stephen who said we have no money. Like they would say that. Then, so I said Rabbi Stephen really liked the new laws to make it workers safer. Then I had the same quote you just said. Property is good, life is better. That while possessions are valuable, life is priceless. And I really like that because it's a source he really likes because he doesn't want another triangle fire and have people die that shouldn't be. We should take precautions and not just have people die because people want to be cheap and make an easy buck off of it. Then with the Baptist clergyman, I said he wants to move into like a Christian law, which is treat everyone right, and how like you want to be treated, and have everybody have good wages. But it'll be kind of hard, like how you said, like if somebody's making $12, they'll move it to $7 and just try to make it easy money in like that way.
Do you find it interesting? I'm sorry, I'll say that. I'll save that question for the end. Who else is here? Joe Franson, the other Joe.
Yeah, I wanted to add in the part where he said before insisting upon inspection and enforcement, let us lift up industrial standards so as to make conditions worth expecting. And to also emphasize that, yeah, the doors were shut on purpose so that people couldn't go out and smoke outside. And they think that the fire was actually started from a cigarette in the scrap bin. So it's just very avoidable things that if they were worth inspecting, like as he said there, at that time, then it's just very avoidable.
Yeah, I think that. Sorry, go ahead. Someone else was about to jump in there.
I was just gonna say there was a part at the end of document 4 that for me really sort of strengthened the arguments of document 5 and 6. And it basically said that the girls that jumped to their death during the fire, the previous year they were striking for better working conditions and better sanitary conditions. And the last sentence really hit me, that it says these dead bodies were the answer. So like the tragedy probably could have been prevented had they listened to the workers that were striking for these better conditions. But
yeah, well, this the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire was a huge deal at the time. and it was a massive scandal, right? You know, very, very, very few people took the line that, well, you know, we need to make money. This is one of the inevitable, but one of the unfortunate but inevitable, you know, consequences of industrialization and things. But everybody wants to have these sheets, these shirtwaists in a way that are made in the Triangle Factory. So this is the price we have to pay. Very few people say that. Did anything else about this? So let's take the every time I've taught this, there's one thing that comes up. If we take document 4, there's one thing that reminds. This is the reporter talking about what happens with for that. This reminds people of one thing in our, well, it's before you were born, I guess, probably, but does it remind you of anything that's happened in our national lives in the last few decades?
The only thing that I could think of is when he was talking about people jumping out the windows, was 9/11.
Yeah.
When people were jumping out of the windows.
Yeah, and that's exactly what everybody says. And I think that's one of the reasons why the fire and the death, the whole episode was so shocking. And let me just only say this because it's the only way. I mean, again, you folks were too young, but if you talk to your parents or someone who's my age would know. But you know, if I remember very clearly when they started telling us people are jumping, that added this whole emotional shock and really sort of deep down sickness, like, oh my God, something can be that horrible that you're willing to jump and die in a less painful way, or a way that's quicker in a sense than to die in a fire. There's something about the jumping that just makes it all the worse. And I'm pretty sure, although there's no way to test this, there's no way to analyze this, except for the fact that people talk about this all the time. They talked about the jumping in ways that they didn't talk about other industrial accidents where there wasn't jumping. That you know, being pushed to that horrible decision, or as you say, that the terrible case of where someone is helping people jump, helping people out the building, because it's the better option, is just so gut wrenching that it brings about that. In other words, if this had been another fire, another factory disaster, it would have been bad, and there would have been a lot of calls for reform. But this description, and the fact that especially that William Shepard was right there, more or less on the spot, what had happened, and was able to get and that he described it so graphically and so emotionally, that really brought home a lot of things. And students always mention, that's practically the first thing they always say. So it's that brutalization of industrialism that shocks people. So, and sorry, I didn't mean to go on for that long about, but what else? Yeah, when people jump off the Titanic, sorry, this is Lindsay. That's reported, but that wasn't as necessary. I mean, that's common among during shipwrecks. With the advent of skyscrapers, and in this case, you know, this Triangle Shirtwaist Factory is kind of a skyscraper. You know, to have a building high enough that you can jump out of and kill yourself is that's a real shock to people. So anyway, that's good. But you've done an excellent job, all of you so far, of analyzing these things. And the reason I say this thing about the jumping is that I think, although I don't know. Again, this is one of these things that just to contemplate. It's so horrible that that's one of the reasons there are these strong religious responses, saying that what are we doing as supposedly moral people? How are we letting, as supposedly moral people, how are we letting this sort of thing happen? Whereas if this had been, and again, I don't know because, it did happen this way. If just been a standard fire, people died in the fire and not had jumped, I don't think there would have been as much moralizing about it. Okay, so anything else about this question? Okay, well, I think only Jeanette's here for question 4. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, well, you're going to get massive bonus points. Of course, the other people probably have written it on the discussion board, but go ahead.
I'm gonna be quite honest. I had to work a lot Sunday and yesterday, so I didn't get to read over this as much as I wanted to.
Okay, well, that's all right. Well, if you don't want to answer it, well, you can go on the discussion board and we can just skip it for now. We're
Well,
running out of time anyway.
I read it this morning real quick, and I think I kind of understand the gist of it.
This is by far the hardest. This is the hardest essay, the most high level. This is sort of a type of essay that a graduate student deals with in history in this entire book. So
yeah, like ideally I would have gotten to read it a second or a third time, but
yeah,
sometimes things just happen.
Yeah.
But it's this idea that progressivism is supposed to be this one ideal, but it wasn't. And I think he splits it up into like 3 different large versions of progressivism, which one is like the one that I've at least heard about the most, that is more of the humanitarian philosophical reasoning of like, well, we should have all of these progressive ideas because humans are important and the human spirit and all of that. And then there's the like economic one and the political one. Where like the economic reasoning seemed to me more of like these big companies kind of like agreeing with progressive ideals because it was easier than fighting against them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, like unions, I think would be a good, like a lot of companies fought against unions, but at the end of the day, sometimes it was just easier to come to a compromise and allow there to be a union.
Yep.
And then also the political reasoning that was like, again, kind of similar to the economic one, where progressivism was becoming very popularized, and it was a good way to get political support. That's kind of what I got of it. And then also the different ways that was seen. Like, didn't the middle class kind of come from this?
There was a widening and a broadening of the middle class, but that was partly because of the second industrial revolution.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. But one of the ideas that Rogers is making is that we do identify a middle class. God, I was going to say do-gooder, but that sounds terrible. Reformer ideology that grows up around progressivism, and that isn't as locally focused as it might have been. That's why you have these massive national movements for
Yeah,
women's
which
suffrage, or
was
massive movements for industrial safety reform and things like that.
yeah, which was kind of I think more of the political aspect of it because I don't know personally how useful that large scale progressivism would actually be because local issues are so different.
Right, and also, you know, it's because it happens to be sorry, that sort of activism is usually in the progressive area a similar sort of group of people, middle class people with enough time on their hands that they actually can organize and stuff like that. So it is you know, it's a very different and identifiable sort of change in the way things are
Mhm.
approached. Okay, well, let's move on to 5. Is anybody here from group 5?
Just me. Just Lindsay,
Wait a minute.
I think,
Okay.
right? I think it's just
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah.
all right. I also skimmed through because I also worked a lot this weekend, so I'm very sorry. And I read some of it this morning. I'm sorry. I just have a lot going on right now.
Right. Yeah, we all do.
I know that's like not an excuse, but anyways, so reading this, it was actually really interesting to me. I liked how like the woman like wanted to get into the government, which I felt like was like a double standard because they're not getting their way. And now all of a sudden they're going to go, you know, try to make it. But I also felt like it was a double standard that now they are going for the lower and middle class and they kind of want to separate that. Like they
Right.
want to like kind of do like a middle and lower class. And they also were only allowed to wear white labeled clothes during the
Yeah.
National Consumer League, which I thought was like a double standard because men could do whatever they wanted and like women couldn't. Like I felt like of how strict everything was, and they were still working. They were doing pretty much what the men were doing, just maybe not as
Mhm.
long hours. So I felt like that was a very high double standard that she made in this essay. Also I like the hours. I wrote like they said like working hours for the workers. They were longer than if like they lived with their employers
Uh-huh.
or like the woman. And then Francis Keller, he is that a boy? Is that a guy? Francis Keller?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. He created like a new model to like try to protect them, but I think it
Oh,
kind
sorry.
of
No, Frances Keller is a woman. I don't know why.
okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. So
There's another Frances Keller in the 1930s, a different reformer, but so I got
okay.
brain fart there.
So they like she tried to pretty much like create a new working mount for them, but I think it went south because of the government. Like they didn't want them to have like that freedom, I guess. Like they were fighting for it and like they were trying, but there was just like a lot of things that were double standard that like women could do, but like they also had like domestic violence during this time, like and violence for like how they were getting treated in the work field. So I just thought like the men had more freedom, even though they were fighting for it. They just no one really wanted to budge. And I can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think those things are absolutely true. And one of the things that always impresses me about this essay, this article, is that she goes on to show, well, she shows in so many ways, right, how deep this history is, how many people were involved in these movements, and how many and how many different ideas are coming out of the women's progressive wing, if you will, and how important it is to try to capture that, all of that, and not to say, oh, women reformers thought this and wanted this, women progressives thought that and wanted this. You know, these there are these different ideas and different strains, and it's important to work through them all.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm
Well,
sorry.
that's enough.
Okay. Okay.
As I say, we are running out of time. Yeah, so that's good. This discussion today was really excellent. I'm really happy with the way all of you contributed today, and I've written it down that that I was very happy. And anytime you make me happy, your grade goes up. So keep it up. I'm hoping you're liking this book, because I always have trouble with it. It seems this major problem series, because I assign it in a lot of classes, but I think for a lot of people it just seems so daunting, because it's it looks from the outset very dry. They're just, it's
I actually really-
historians talking about historians and stuff like that. But every time I actually get into the deep level of it with an upper division class, it works out very well.
I actually really like it. I think this is like a book that I'll probably keep for like ever, because I really like it and I would like to read more of it like on my own time, like reread it all.
Yeah.
Because I really liked how they put everything together. I don't have that other book after Flanagan. I'm gonna try to call the bookstore. I never got like that 5th book. I forget which
Lynching one?
I believe so. I have Kinzer and I have Flanagan, but I don't have Lynching, I believe.
Okay, well, when you I'm sorry, I'm just looking at my bookshelves.
Do you think it would be on Amazon?
Oh, it's definitely on Amazon, but what I'm saying is I think I have more than one.
Okay.
So why don't you, when you figure it out and you don't have it, text me, email me, and I can send you one of mine.
Okay, I'm gonna call the bookstore because I realized that was coming up soon. I don't know if anyone else doesn't have that book, but I don't have it.
I just went to the bookstore recently and got it, so I think they got it in.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm going to. I know they called me about a book, but I wasn't sure which one it was because like the whole bookstore thing got messed up like during the beginning. So I'm gonna see if they still have that book.
Well, I have to say, Lindsay, if you're gonna keep Major Problems as a book forever, you're definitely going to keep Lynching and Spectacle, because it's something that you can think about forever just as an American. It's a very fascinating book. And by the way, who's taking my some of you taking my World War II course?
So I did my scheduling and I don't have room for electives right now because I have to do some prereqs for the education program since I am a double major.
Yeah.
I am going to take it. Like it is in my like plan to take it at some point.
Oh, okay. Well, somebody else said yes. Okay.
It's me, Katie.
Yeah. Well, it turns out I'm using, for the first time, I'm going to use this. They have this series again. I find it, the format seems so dry as dust, but they have one of these for every period.
Sweet.
In American history.
Oh,
And
really?
so we're assigning this for this is going to be one of the books.
Do they have a Vietnam one?
Undoubtedly.
That would be really cool for like when I become like when I get my education degree and like be a teacher. Like that would be cool to like use for like projects and stuff for my students, maybe like go off some of that stuff. Like if I teach like a honors or like AP history class.
Yeah, in fact, if you look in maybe it's not in the Gilded Age one. They should have a list of all the different ones. Oh, they don't. That's odd. Oh yeah, they do at the very back. Oh no, wait a minute. Yeah, the Major Problems in American History titles available. Just scanning now. This may be very boring.
Oh yes, they do. I just Googled it. They do have one in Vietnam. It's called Major Problems in the History of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
I wish I would have known about that. I could have used it for my research paper.
Yeah, there it is. Okay, yeah, see. So anyway, yeah, so Katie and those of you who are taking it, we're definitely continuing with it. Okay, I got to shut us off because we're over time now. So I'll talk to you Thursday. I'm going to put the Flanagan discussion questions up very soon. I'm also putting this Zoom discussion agenda, the video of it right away because it was harder to do that in New York. So we'll have this for your assignment 3. Okay, adios.